So, Susan, what do you think has been the impact of COVID-19 on religion and belief?
I think there are so many factors, actually, Ed. I think obviously the biggest is the lack of community. It seems so frustrating to us that we cannot be together. And although in the past we have sometimes bemoaned our meetings and the many meetings that we have, now we don't have any. It is so strange. So I think, and of course there are various angles to that. There's this whole sort of psychological, I am alone sort of angle to it, which is never a good thing. And it's always interesting that the beginning of the Bible says, God says, it is not good for man to be alone. We know it's not good now for us to be alone. So things like this Zoom capability is wonderful because you actually can see people. And hear people, and a phone call is good because you hear a voice, and all these things that we take for granted that we suddenly realize is so necessary to us to see and to hear each other. And I think added to that, we forget the tangible element of being together, the physical sense of standing next to somebody or of being able to put your arm on their shoulder or whatever is a real lack.
So we've lost the physicality, but we've gained the intimacy in a funny sort of way. Connectedness. I mean, in other words, we're isolated but connected, just as I'm looking around your house right now.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yes, we have our own backdrops. And I think I noticed this when I was emailing parishioners during the week. Whereas in the past, there's been more of a sort of professional sort of, bless you kind of ending to an email. I'm now putting with love, because it's important now, because I can't show that in other ways that I might normally do, like with a touch on the shoulder or a being next to someone and exchanging a glance. Now it has to be done in other ways. So that's interesting, you should say that.
And of course, words mean a bit more. When you say take care, it somehow feels different from the take care.
Absolutely it does. Yes, it's interesting how our language can change. Yes, there are losses, but I agree with you, there are definitely gains.
In previous conversations, I've heard a lot about funerals and how they're being managed. But you have one or two examples of another life moment, the wedding.
Yes, and again, we haven't quite reached the crunch point where I've had to say to the couple, actually, this really isn't going to happen, but I have had to send the warning email out saying, if we cannot be out of lockdown at the time when we need to read your bans, then actually we cannot read them. You can then get a certificate, so that's okay, but then the wedding is only 5 people, and that's crazy, for a wedding in particular. And I have to not think creatively about how many other ways I can get more people. But for them, it's devastating actually for them, because this is a really big moment. And now everything that they've worked for, and it gets quite a lot of work just to get to the point where you think, yes, the service can go ahead with all the celebrations that go with it. So yeah, that's really curious. And I think you can make things very special. But a bit like some of the funeral arrangements that people might be, there is a local funeral director who's doing some videos for people if need be. But the point about it is that the community gathers, isn't it? So we've got to be so creative in thinking how else we could do that if the wedding couples go ahead with their very small wedding. We are allowed then to do a blessing of a wedding at any point afterwards. So, in the next year, we could do another one that was a blessing, but at least the whole community could come to that.
So what is the biggest challenge for your church, for your community? Obviously there are technical challenges, the distance, but what else? How are you responding?
I'm very aware, I think as a Christian minister, as an Anglican priest in particular, within a community we are parochially based, and therefore a large part of my work is actually community building. And so, suddenly not to be able to do that in any ordinary sense has been a real challenge. And yet the gains of that are now as a village volunteer for my end of the village. I'm now getting to know people whose prescriptions I'm running backwards and forwards with. And the lovely thing is that people have popped out of the woodwork as well. So I've had emails, because I suppose I'm a public figure within the village, so people think, oh, well, I can ask the vicar that. So they say, look, is there anything I can do? And so I've met a couple of lovely people in our village who have said, what can I do? And we've had conversations, and we realise when we have conversations that actually we quite like the sound of each other, and you know, it's been developing a bit of a relationship, and that's been great.
Has it changed your sense of mission?
I'm very conscious that we are, in comparison, quite a public and not a private and not a domesticated faith, which is not where we've always been as a Christian faith at all. And particularly in Britain, when you go back to the Celtic edge and the sort of 300s, 400s, when everybody was very domestic, and your faith was your hearth and your home, and all your prayers, just as many of the Jewish prayers, are to do with your home environment, and we've lost that. So yes, I think this could be a really interesting challenge for us. And interestingly, you know, you've now got the sort of backdrop that I have when I'm videoing my Sunday services, and you can't see it actually because the lights, oh, you can just see it. I'm thinking, right, what do I need here to make this more of a sacred space that people immediately recognise as a sacred space rather than just my bookshelf? So I had to put my cross in a place. It gets quite ethereal actually, the cross, depending what the light is like, but that was placed there. And then I bring a candle in, and you have to position that right and all that sort of thing.
What about the more difficult parts of this coronavirus impact? Funerals, death, managing grieving, people in isolation. How's it working for you?
I mean, I do think that I am very fortunately placed, and I think East Anglia itself perhaps is much better off than, for instance, my daughters in London. You know, they're in a different place completely as far as this goes. However, I think I notice it a lot with our elderly, particularly our very elderly, who are literally bound into one room and really only have the television as their way of relating with everybody else. And of course that's just constant, and the anxiety levels that I see in them are, you know, verge on the tragic at times. You think, you know, don't do this, you know, and I sort of cheerfully try to say, well, is there anything else you can do? You know, try not to listen to the news, swap channels, try and find something else. But you feel for them, you really feel for them. I'm fortunate in not having yet done any COVID funerals. And maybe we're just a healthy bunch in these three villages, I don't know what it is, but so I feel very fortunate. And sort of then you get the other anxieties of, you know, well, surely I should be doing more of this, and you know, why am I so fortunate? But it's, yes, it's, and I find, and I've talked to a number of people now where we say, well, actually during a day we start off really well and then we have a swing. And all of a sudden, just a very small thing can switch a little switch in us, such that our sort of fairly buoyant mood has suddenly vanished. Yes. And we find ourselves down.
It's almost as if we need tactics, don't we, to break that? And that's part of what faith brings, of course, whether it's about prayer or just asking big questions. Well, we're coming towards the close, but I can't help but ask you what you think. And I know it's impossible to answer, but what do you think the long-term implications are? Are we just going to return to type, or is this actually going to be one of those transformative moments in history?
I would love to say that it was going to be a transformative time, and I really hope and will try and do all I can. And our community is feeling exactly the same, literally exactly the same way. It was one of the, we don't stream our services, but we have an online coffee after church chat on Zoom. And this was exactly what we were talking about, because I said to people this time round, look, we're not in church as such, but I want you to bring something to that meeting that's given you a bit of hope this week, that's been something tangible that has lifted you, and you can share it with us and we will be lifted, I'm sure. And it was lovely. And people after that were saying, look, we don't know that we do want to return to where we were. And I suspect that if we are wise, we won't. But we know how it is with humanity, and things can so easily just settle back.
What's the one thing, Susan, that you're going to carry on doing after this is ended and the church doors are open?
I think when you said earlier on something about the intimacy that we have gained, that is for me quite key, because I'm still relatively new in this particular parish, these parishes. I've just been here just over a year, and in that year I realised, back in Cambridgeshire, which I know very well, that people are terribly British and quite reserved, and I haven't got to know people as much as I would like to have done. And this has been a chance, with that extra sort of intimacy level that we have when we're one-to-one with people on the phone or whatever. So I would like to keep that in some way. And I don't know how yet, or how that's going to work, but I want to work at it.
Susan Bowden-Pickstock, thank you very much.